Here is the church. Here is the steeple. Open the doors and see all the people. All the people.
All the people.
All the people.
All the people.
God accepts all the people.
All the people.
All the people.
So do we, the United Church of Christ. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here.
All the people.
No matter where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here. You all know who I am. I wore my name tag. And on behalf of our members and friends, I welcome you to this wonderful Harkness Memorial State Park for our service of worship today.
Amen.
We are not doing a live stream this morning, but we are recording, and we'll put the worship service up on our YouTube channel this week. So if you happen to be watching that service, we always invite you to share joys and concerns with us for prayer, and we hope that the words and acts of this hour are a blessing to you. We are enjoying a picnic following this service. We are huddling together because it's just a little cool here on the Long Island Sound this morning, but we know it's going to warm up, and we are just so thrilled that we can be here today. Next Sunday, our worship service is at Crossroads Presbyterian Church, 70 Cross Road in Waterford, and it is a 10 a.m. joint service of worship. So we hope that we'll have a good turnout. We're not wearing red shirts next week, but I'll be there, you'll be there, we'll know who we are. And we look forward to joining once again with our friends at Crossroads Presbyterian Church. There are no other announcements today, so I invite us to prepare our minds and hearts for worship as we listen quietly to the music of the prelude.
Day to those that applies to, and benvenuto to the rest of you. Would you please join me in opening our spirits? Love God with heart and soul and mind and strength. That's the top of the list. Love your neighbor as you do yourself.
That should be on our list too.
What if you don't like your neighbor? Or your neighbor is whining and demanding? Or your neighbor speaks a different language? Or your neighbor doesn't like you?
Are we free to ignore neighbors like that?
Not if we want to experience all the gifts of God's love. Not if we want to see love's healing power truly at work in the world.
Gracious God, send your Spirit whispering among us this morning. Help us heal our neighbor.
God be with you. Let us share with one another a sign of Christ's peace.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Dad.
Good morning. Peace be with you. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Joe.
Have some. Good morning. Barbara.
Nice peace, my Barbara. Mother of the doctor.
Good morning, Johnny. Hey, you know, you keep paying.
Robert. Peace.
I'm okay.
I never get this far back.
Almost here. Peace, my friend. Good to see you. He's great now.
Thank you. I'm
The opening hymn this morning is you'll find the insert in your order of worship, and we're singing 4 stanzas for the musicians. 4. Okay, we're singing in the middle.
For the beauty of the earth.
1, 2, 4, and 5. 2, 4, 5. Don't have to stand unless you want to.
What if we only label 1, 2, 3, 4?
That's where the musicians.
Matt, where are we again? Excellent. So now we can go on to our prayer of invocation, please. Would you like to start? In this beautiful place, we approach you, God of creative energy. Help us to see your hand at work in sky and sea, tree and flower. Help us to see your love in the people all around us today. Help us to find that love in our own lives. For the sake of Jesus, who teaches us to pray in these words. Our Father, who art in heaven,
kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Blessed by this place, blessed by God's gifts to us, let us respond from our hearts as we receive the morning offering. And I believe Henry is going to pass his hat so that we can hearts and words with mine in prayer. Let these gifts become a witness for your justice and grace alive in the world. Let the hands that give them be willing to work for the benefit of all we meet. In Jesus' name, amen. Please be seated. Let us go to God in the spirit of prayer. Loving God, we raise all of our joys and all of our concerns before you now. Whether they are spoken out loud in the safety of this circle or held quietly in the privacy of our own hearts, we know that you hear and you answer prayer in your way and according to your will. Even as the joy of gentle breezes, the sense of summer in the sea, the grass, the trees, all that is surrounding us this morning in reminders of the nurture of your creation, even as we relax in their midst. We know, God, that these are moments when you help us to renew, to refocus our vision, to resolve to move forward in your love. We pray today for those who don't have the luxury of being able to relax in surroundings like this, for those feel anxiety and even terror, wondering where children or parents have been taken. Those who wonder when justice rolling down like mighty waters will reach them. Those who wonder when your mercy will touch and transform their lives. Help us not to be passive. Help us to recognize situations that call for our voices, call for our bodies, call for our presence, standing in the truth of your gospel given through Jesus. Help us, gracious God, never to accept injustice as something that just happens, but help us to be agents of change. For the sake of Jesus, who gave all that we might have life, and that all the world may know your love, we pray. Amen. Amen.
This morning, scripture is Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 through 40. I will read from the Message. When the Pharisees heard how he had bested the Sadducees, they gathered their forces for an assault. One of their religion scholars spoke for them, posing a question they hoped would show him up. Teacher, which command in God's law is the most important? Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your passion, prayer, and intelligence. This is the most important, the first on any list. But there is a second to set alongside it. Love others as well as you love yourself. These two commands are pegs. Everything in God's law and the prophets hangs from them.
And the second reading today is from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verses 12 through 16. It continues our reading of the Ten Commandments, and I'll be reading today from the Message version. The word of God to Moses for the people. Honor your father and mother so that you'll live a long time in the land that God, your God, is giving you. No murder, no adultery, no stealing, no lies about your neighbor. This ends the scripture readings for the morning. Thanks be to God. Would you please join your hearts with mine in prayer? Now, loving God, send your Holy Spirit down upon us, that hearing your word we might understand it, and that understanding your word we might go forth and do it. Amen. Well, there's nothing quite like a 7-year-old who's coming to grips with the whole idea behind rules. I was a 7-year-old. And when I was a 7-year-old, I recall grappling with the Ten Commandments and what it really meant. I had heard some of them when I was younger, and I went to a parochial school, so I'm sure they were listed more than once. I sure knew about rules, but I just knew what I was supposed to do and what I wasn't supposed to do. The why had not really occurred to me yet. I hadn't had my second 3-year-olddom. I know that at that early age I loved God, but I loved a God who wore big white robes and lived up in a fluffy cloud. I had many brothers and sisters, so I had learned something about some of the rest of the Ten Commandments. The ones that really had any relevance to me were the ones about mom and dad, the ones about stealing, the ones about lying, because I knew I could get in trouble if I broke any of those. The others were probably just theory to me. What did I know at 7 years old about murder or what you should do with your neighbor? The one that probably got explained to me poorly, though, was the one about taking God's name in vain. It got translated as no bad words. No bad words. And since no one could actually say what no bad words they were not supposed to say to a young child, no adult was going to say, don't say, or I had no idea what words I wasn't supposed to say. Eventually, I would hear older people, adults mostly, my teenage siblings on occasion, I'd hear them let out an occasional bad word. Because of that, I knew what the bad words were. I was making a list in my mind. I was watching the reactions of people to what happened when other folks uttered those words. And so there was a list in my mind that probably wasn't entirely accurate. Maybe it wasn't complete, but I did start to wonder what would happen if I picked one of those words and uttered it for myself. At first it was just this little thing in the back of my mind that said, I wonder what would happen. But you know how ideas like that are. They grow and they start to fester and they start to loom. And pretty soon I needed to say that word. So one day, when it was very quiet around the house, very quiet, when I was in the cellar where no one could see me or hear me, I struggled and strained to utter one of those bad words. I felt the weight of the world just standing still, holding its breath. When I was sure no one was listening, I shaped my tongue and I let it fly. Darn! Nothing happened. Not a thing. But I was sure watching for signs that the basement ceiling was going to fall down on my head, or that a big animal was going to come running down the stairs and grab me and drag me up in front of my parents to face judgment. Darn it. It would be so much easier for us if we understood what it was to follow the law. It would be so much easier to say everyone should just follow the law if it didn't involve just one little factor. That X factor is human nature. We're creatures who think and choose. We're complicated in our thought process because we know in our own minds what is right, or what we think is right, and so sometimes rules don't make sense to us, or we make a list that we don't get quite right. Now, I trust all of us sitting here today would want to make the right choice, do the right thing. It feels good to do what is right. It feels virtuous. Our self-esteem rises when we do what we think is the right thing. We want to do the right thing. But then things come up. Opportunities arise. Temptations appear in front of us. Like that 7-year-old in the cellar, we start wondering, what if I were to do something? And once something gets in our brain, it doesn't just go away, does it? All things are possible for us. We have a very hard time turning away from something we are obsessed with. So each of us, I think, somewhere deep in the back of our heads has a list, what we could call things we shouldn't have to worry about. You know what they are. It's a short list. We heard that list just a moment ago. Honor your parents. Don't murder. Don't sleep around. Don't steal. Don't lie about your neighbor. And I'll throw in the 6th one, the one that isn't in today's reading. We're going to treat it the next time we get together. Don't lust after anything that is your neighbor's. We're going to talk about that another time, but I don't want you walking away thinking I forgot that commandment. There are 10. But we have that list. It's short and simple. These 5 words from God have one thing in common. Each of them is about how we treat other people. And we do need those rules because of the way the natural order works. when the strong can dominate the weak, when the powerful can take advantage of those who are vulnerable, when we just don't have enough eyes in the back of our heads to see what's coming, we find ourselves apprehensive, looking over our shoulders. Will someone break into my home and take my stuff? Will someone ruin my reputation by making up lies about me? Will someone assault me, take away my dignity and perhaps my health? Now the point of this list, these words from God, is simple. It's to help us find freedom. Freedom through respecting relationships. Because when we respect relationships and all that comes along with them, it leads to liberation from fear. Through living in that freedom, we find the energy to be able to do other things, to be able to pack ourselves off to Harkness Park and have a picnic, for instance. This code of right living, these words from God, offer the promise of exhilarating freedom. The big question, though, the question that is swirling all around us today, the question that surfaced even in our gathering this morning, is whether we can be free without extending the assurances of that code to our neighbor. Now, we've seen the photos, the videos, we've read the reports of disturbing new policies at our nation's southern border this week. We've seen 4-year-olds separated from their mothers, brought to separate facilities, warehoused in a former Walmart store in hurricane-fenced enclosures, stowed away in a big tent with porta potties for sanitation. Children, toddlers. We've seen parents told, sorry, but you made a bad choice. We've seen parents told, we may give you back your kid, or we may not. We've seen parents told, next time think twice before you come here. And we've even had a high government official cherry-picking a quote from our own scriptures to admonish Christians to just go along with the government because really it's not our concern, it's the government's concern. And God said the government could do these things. Now that passage from the 13th chapter of Romans has been used to justify concentration camps, has been used to justify slavery, has been used to justify invasions of peaceful countries. When we're told to obey the government because God has put it in place, that's the justification for many atrocities. But the official, using that quote, missed the bulk of Paul's writing, and especially the letter to the Galatians chapter 3, verse 10, where Paul says, for all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, cursed is everyone who does not observe and obey all the things written in the book of the law. Love for God, love for neighbor, love for children. These are all also in Scripture. And using one short passage from a letter to justify violating that great bulk of the law condemns that person out of his own mouth. The code of the 10 Commandments cries out against the kind of treatment that is being offered to immigrant parents and children at the border. Loving God and loving neighbor is our watchword. How is it loving our neighbor to separate parents from their children just because we can? If we're tempted to say, but they're not really our neighbors, so this code doesn't apply, we have a word from Jesus. You heard the reading from Matthew this morning, where Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? And he responds, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. In the Gospel of Luke, Luke has a scholar approaching Jesus, and Jesus asking the scholar, well, what's really important? And the scholar says, well, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says, do that and you will live. Then the scholar pushes it and says, well, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? I think you know the story. That Jesus tells the parable of the man who was beaten and robbed and left by the side of the road. A priest walks by, sees this man bleeding, crosses to the other side of the road and keeps on walking. A lawyer comes along the road, sees the man bleeding there, just walks on by. But then a stranger, a foreigner, somebody who, strictly speaking, doesn't belong, a Samaritan, comes and sees the man and his heart goes out to him. He picks him up, binds his wounds, puts him on his own animal, brings him to an inn, pays for him to be tended to and kept, and comes by a couple weeks later on his way back to check on him. Who is our neighbor? If you see ramped up security, armed militias, walls being built, are we answering Jesus' question about what's most important? Because we know the answer is, when you're doing those kinds of things, the answer would be, well, it's the person who looks like me and speaks my language and belongs in my neighborhood. And we know that that's not Jesus' answer. Living in the freedom we are offered means exerting every effort to treat our neighbor justly. By striving to keep parents and children together, by working to reduce fear, to alleviate conditions that cause such stress at our borders, by remembering that we are only free when our neighbor feels secure enough to extend freedom to us. So my friends, on this day, when we honor fathers in particular, when we honor the institution of parenting, relationships of strength and protection, relationships of providence and nurture, may we resolve to live in Christ's freedom and to work for God's justice. Amen. out with your eyes and ears and hearts open today. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Remember that God has given you love that knows no bound, given you grace that knows no measure. May you be blessed this day in the name of God, who created you, who redeemed you, and who sustains you. Amen.
Amen. Hallelujah.
What keeps me coming back to Umstead Park UCC or to my UCC church is it's a place where you feel a covenant. You feel that partnership. It takes the pain away when you're with friends because it's like you're going to be around friends. And when you're around friends, you don't feel pain. When you're sitting next to friends that hold a seat for you every Sunday, you don't feel pain. Pain leaves. And that's how you feel and how I feel every Sunday when I go to church. We take up social, moral issues at our church. Those issues can be an array of things, but we bring it up to the top. We don't let it sit. And that's one thing about a UCC church is we take action when it happens. We don't wait for other churches to take action. We're the headliner. We take it on, and then people follow the UCC churches. And that's one thing that I like. It's just like open and affirming. We had to do it first, then the others came behind us. And that's why I go to my UCC church.
My husband had not been attending church, had never really attended church. And we would have conversations about church and so forth. And he said, really, I'm an atheist. And I said, gosh, I'm really sorry. But he always respected my faith. I looked at different denominations, and then I came to Federated Church. When he said that he would come and attend church with me, I was just like, really? I mean, and he said, and he would say, now he said, I'm not joining. I said, okay. But he said, I know this is important, this is hard for you. I'll be happy to come. Then it got to be, he would ask me, are you going to the 9 o'clock or the 11? And I would tell him which one. And then pretty soon he would say, well, which one are we going to? And I would just sit there and pray at the beginning of the service. And I would just say, please, Lord, speak to my husband. And speak to me in a way that won't block God speaking to Alan. We had attended the membership classes, and we were supposed to turn in our form. You fill in and says, what are your interests and, date of birth and all that stuff. And he said to me, it was a Saturday night, and he said, we better get home. We've got to complete those forms. And that was my aha moment, that I knew that God had been speaking through our minister and the people around us at Federated, that God had been speaking to my husband. I'd never expected that. And the first time that he took communion with me, I had never expected that. Never in my life. It was something. It was something. And when then he started to get involved in when he joined the church, that my daughter came. She said, "Boy, I thought I'd never see this." again, I think it's the whole concept of the UCC in that, and Federated, is that Alan didn't know faith, and he viewed it as a mystery, and he was comfortable with exploring that mystery there at the Federated Church. If there was no UCC, my husband would not know God. And my husband, knowing God, really so enriches my life. And it is just a joy to sit and worship with him. And we are very faithful attendees. I bet we don't miss 3 Sundays a year. So if there was no UCC and there was no Federated Church, my husband would not know God.
My wife and I joined the UCC a year before we left Indianapolis. She had grown up UCC in Nebraska. I had grown up sort of a non-denominational mutt, having spent time in the Southern Baptist, Catholic, Unitarian, UCC, Presbyterian, I think did I say Catholic? Yeah, just about every denomination there is. And we found that, it was really important for us as we were raising a family to find community in a church. But both of us also found ourselves somewhat skeptical of organized religion. For us, it was really important that opening inclusive was a huge thing for us. We just didn't believe, and that was part of our skepticism of other denominations of the Christian faith, was that it seemed so inconsistent with the teachings of Jesus. And we found that the UCC church was the most consistent, the most accepting, not just of people that are following the Christian faith, but those who may be on a different walk and may find aspects of the Christian faith intriguing, but don't want to commit to it. And we just felt like the UCC offered the best, sort of best of all worlds. I think for us, the UCC offers a chance to focus on the now. So many other religions focus on, the fear-mongering and what's going to happen after you die, and that was not really, we believe that, yes, that's important, but all we have is the now. And so for us to live in the moment and to be part of a church that's really focused on social justice was huge. I think the UCC church does a better job than any other denomination at respecting the individuality of the worshiper, the individuality of us as people, as souls that are on a journey, and says, hey, we don't need you to fit into a mold. You don't have to believe this. You can just come. Just come, show up, find some sort of really redeeming, wonderful, uplifting, inspiring, challenging moment in a worship experience here. And then, leave here and find some way to make that real in your life.
The UCC really is, in my opinion, the foundation of the backbone of Federated Church. Federated Church is a place where it's a comfortable place for my family. Raising my kids, trying to raise 2 daughters, ages 6 and 3, in a place where I want them to have a different experience in church than I had. A story I can share is our oldest daughter, Brooke. We were driving her to school one day with her best friend, Claire. And Brooke, her dad's Jewish and her mom is Christian, but they don't attend any services. So Brooke looked over to Claire and said, Claire, you really ought to come to church school with us one day. And Claire looked at Brooke and said, well, what do you do at church school? And Brooke said, it's so much fun. We have so much fun, Claire. It's even more fun than going to Chuck E. Cheese's. And that, to me, it was huge. Having a 6-year-old talk about church as being more fun than Chuck E. Cheese's, It's amazing. It's really probably the most comfortable feeling I could have. You know, when I'm sitting in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, all the other stress and things that seem to be going through my head throughout the week just seem to dissipate, and it's just a feeling of complete comfort, serenity, acceptance. It's really a safe place to land. It's not the church of your childhood, and it's a place to, again, a soft place to land, and a place that will challenge your thinking. One of the greatest things about UCC, I think, is it challenges the way I had thought about God and spirituality and religion in the past. And what a blessing that is to you know, allow me to grow in my faith journey.
I love going to my church. I love our church. Being part of this United Church of Christ congregation is a real plumb line for me. Without a faith community, my life would become very isolating. I feel like my life would really lack meaning. If I were ever sick and in the hospital, I feel like these people in my faith community would be there for me in ways that even my neighbors couldn't really be there, because they wouldn't be able to walk with me in the meaning-making journey. You know, beyond my husband and my child and my parents, the first person I would want to see is my pastor, because I really look to her as a source of wisdom and support, and a person who causes me to feel connected to a bigger meaning in my life. Our minister, Stacy, begins every service reminding us that there's room for us, that if we have doubt, there's room for us, and reminding us that she always says, for those of you who are sure in what you believe and who surely do not know what to believe, you are welcome here.
The UCC is special because of its willingness to give opportunity to so many people. It's a place where folks who have felt disenfranchised from other places can come to begin to feel whole again. One person in particular who had stopped going to church altogether because they were told they were no longer welcome. And it's because that faith tradition, divorce was unacceptable. To have been rejected in that way after having such a painful time and decision in their lives that's already painful enough to break away from a relationship that you thought was sacred going into it, to have that compounded left deep marks, and many years of the person rejecting religion as damaging, rejecting faith communities as something that's a resource for them, and them really living in that painful place for many years. They chose to just come, one time, and just the tears coming down and the release, and saying, I remember them saying, "Is it always like this?" And we said, "What do you mean? I mean, was this kind of like a special day? Did you do it differently today? So I just happened to come on this one day that you only do it like this?" And we're like, "No, this is it. This is what we do." And over time, that welcoming, that openness, that invitation to come back to God, and knowing you're welcome, healed her.
The UCC is special to me because it has reformed my entire relationship with the church. As a Black man who is also openly gay, I am always attuned to the theology of the church. I heard in the message from the pulpit, and I witnessed in the liturgy and everything that was going on, an embrace that was clear that we are all part of God's community without any regard to our sexual orientation, without regard to race, without regard to class. And I knew from the first moment that I entered that I would become a member of that church. The United Church of Christ is such a huge part of my life that I can't imagine life without it now. I can't imagine going back before it was a big part of my faith identity. I think in many ways I'd be lost because I don't know of any other place that brings the combination of things that are important to me in terms of theology, in terms of social engagement, in terms of embrace of broad cultures, in terms of diverse leadership. I think that my life would be, I would feel somewhat rudderless without it, without the UCC at this point.
If there's no UCC, there is a very good chance that I wouldn't even be here. I think it became extremely evident to me this past year, actually, when the UCC was really the foundation of me sort of finding myself again. This past year has been incredibly difficult for me. So, you know, having struggled with depression for a while, I, almost a year ago, actually attempted to take my own life. And, you know, I came home from school that semester, and going to church Sunday mornings was at first just, you know, something I did, something that I've always done with my family. And, you know, throughout the recovery process, I started to truly listen to everything. You know, the sermons, the music, what the ministries had to say, and seeing that innate goodness that we as people of God do for others was incredibly healing and just exactly what I needed in that moment. Our pastoral staff was incredibly helpful. You know, right from when I came home, and in talking to me and seeing, you know, what the church could do. And at that time, there wasn't really, I didn't feel like, you know, this was, you know, it's not something that I wanted to, I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to forget about it. And just the presence and the willingness to be there for me at the drop of a hat was incredibly important. I don't think that I could have gotten that anywhere else. You know, the UCC and Federated are just, they're right for me. You know, they click. That message that the UCC sends by what they do is overwhelming and inspiring. I've come to realize that this is probably the most healing thing for me, and absolutely what I need to be doing with the rest of my life. So ministry has always been in the back of my mind, and then recently it's just been incredibly present that yes, this is my call, and this is, you know, this is going to be what I'm doing with the rest of my life.
The UCC is special to me because it was really the invitation to come back into relationship with God. When I came out as a gay man, I was ostracized from my church community. Was gone from church for about 15 years, but it was a UCC pastor who was starting a new church, an open and affirming congregation, invited me to come and worship on that first Easter Sunday morning. I thought to myself, gosh, if this man, this pastor, could be ordained, let alone be a Christian and an out gay person, maybe it's the understanding, the belief that's the problem. Maybe it's not me that's the problem. I had to try it out. I had to investigate this. I remember sitting there in the congregation for the first time, hearing this message of love and inclusivity, being so overwhelmed by the experience of the Holy Spirit surrounding me and caring for me and nurturing me in that moment. It didn't seem real to me. It couldn't exist in that form. It was counter to everything I had been raised to believe in. So I sat there in that worship service, just bawled my eyes out as I just felt the presence of God surround me, and did a lot of healing on that Sunday morning. I can't imagine my life without the UCC. I really can't. And the reason why is because I'd been searching my whole life for this kind of community. God has led me to the UCC because that's been my heart's desire.